The journey of being an entrepreneur has been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. To be in a position now where I know that we're able to employ people and also able to do the high quality impact work we do is so fulfilling for myself. Back in 2008, after I'd graduated from university, I decided to move to South Korea to teach English. And while I was there was this incredible opportunity to take a day trip into North Korea. To sum it up really quickly, it was the most bizarre experience of my life. I was more disappointed than informed. And so I decided to go onto Google and I typed in, what the heck is North Korea? And what I learned horrified me. This was a country where there were hundreds of thousands of people in concentration camps, that millions of people have starved to death from a famine, that it was illegal to leave the country, that people didn't have access to cell phones or the internet. I started to read as much and learn as much as I could about the country. I became obsessed and I wanted other people to care about it just as much, and I found that really difficult. It wasn't until I put a human rights documentary on that I noticed that my mom finally cared. She broke down into tears, and that's when I realized that film and the arts was able to do the one thing that nothing else could, and that was get through to my mom. So I thought, what could happen if we could pack a room full of people and do the same thing over again, but with more people? So in 2012, some friends and I came together and we launched a Human Rights Film Festival. Our programming grew. We introduced a brand new podcast. We introduced an arts and social justice training program for youth. But my team and I were still fighting. We didn't have enough funding to make this a permanent and sustainable thing. So the question really became, how can we take this to the next level? All of that changed when we were introduced to the Arts Fest program.
So very often we're working with small and mid-sized arts organizations run by a volunteer or by a 1 or 2 person staff who really haven't done this before. And so there are a lot of nerves and anxiety around doing this. We quickly learned that we needed to provide good training in the art of sponsorship. Arts Fest is a matching incentive tool, but it also provides the training that our arts organizations need to effectively approach the business community with partnership plan. We are seeing so much success from arts leaders who have never done this before.
We are extremely grateful for the Arts Fest program, as it has helped us build our own skills in sponsorship. It was great to hear from experts in the sector and what has worked for them.
Nous avons pu échanger avec plusieurs différentes personnes de différentes régions.
They've been able to bring more of a business sensibility to how arts and culture initiatives can attract sponsors and partners that may not otherwise have thought to invest in arts and culture initiatives.
You learn about budget cycles, you learn about differentiation, you learn about why organizations buy sponsorships from different groups.
It's really helped us through the mentorships learn how to validate our worth and pitch our value to sponsors. It has helped boost morale with the company as well, in terms of defining what it is we do.
If you really understand what your organization has to offer and what that partnership is and how it's going to benefit the organization that you're speaking to, then I think you'll have great success in fundraising.
On encourage tout le monde de participer à ce programme dans le futur. Ça fait vraiment une grande différence au niveau de notre capacité organisationnelle et de levée de fonds.
Without Arts Fest, we would still be a small grassroots organization. They've been able to help support us to get from a place that was earning $43,000 in 2016 to $100,000 in 2017 to over $200,000 in 2018. And we're on pace this year to hit close to $500,000. To be here now and to know that our work is not just changing people's lives, but it's helping provide a really important space for some of our world's most underserved people to express their stories, means everything to me, not just as an arts worker, not just as a human rights activist, but an ally as well. In many ways, it's like a life's mission realized.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue à tous. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge those who came before us and our commitment to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations. I'm on the territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewas, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, we acknowledge Turtle Island is the home to many Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on this territory. Today's session is the third installment of the Arts Response Tracking Survey, a partnership between Business and Arts, the National Arts Centre, and Nanos Research. The third survey of more than 1,000 people was in the field in late November to track Canadians' attitudes on returning to indoor and outdoor arts and cultural events across Canada. Today, we will be first going through the findings, and then we will get reaction from our 3 guest panelists before opening the floor to questions. We started off this afternoon session with a short video about Business and Arts ArtsFest program, our national matching incentive and mentorship training program for small and medium-sized arts, culture, and heritage organizations. In December, we released the results of the 2020 ArtsFest program, which were very positive despite the pandemic, with 455 partnerships created for a total value of over $2.5 million. With continued support from Canadian Heritage and our regional and local funders, we're pleased to announce the next intake of the ArtsFest program. Information sessions will occur online in February. Please note that to be able to apply, you must attend an information session and meet the eligibility criteria available now on our website. In addition to the core curriculum of sponsorship, marketing, and board governance, the program also incorporates crisis and recovery skills training required to build resilient arts organizations. Please visit our website for more information and to register. Nous avons commencé la séance de cet après-midi avec une courte vidéo sur le programme ArtsFest. Ce programme national est composé de fonds de contrepartie et de formation par mentorat pour les petites et moyennes organisations culturelles canadiennes. En décembre, nous avons publié les résultats du programme ArtsFest 2020 qui ont été très positifs malgré la pandémie, avec 455 partenariats totalisant 2,5 millions de dollars. Avec le soutien continu du patrimoine canadien et de nos bailleurs de fonds régionaux et locaux, des séances d'information virtuelles pour la prochaine volée du programme ArtsFest se tiendront en février 2021. Veuillez noter que pour participer à ArtsFest, un représentant de l'organisation doit assister à une séance d'information. S'il vous plaît, visitez notre site web pour plus d'informations et pour vous inscrire. Finally, just a couple small housekeeping items for today's session. The English and the French translation of the Nanos report is now available on our website. La traduction française du rapport Nanos est maintenant disponible sur notre site web. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box and vote for the ones you think are most relevant and you'd like to hear answered. We will try to address as many questions as possible today. Vous pouvez également soumettre des questions en français dans la boîte de questions, mais aucun de notre orateurs aujourd'hui ne sont bilingues. Dans ce cas, je vais paraphraser la question en anglais et il répondra en anglais. Nous répondrons à autant de questions que possible aujourd'hui. We're also happy to have ASL interpreters Amanda and Anissa with us here today. You can pin their video to ensure you will always see the interpretation at the top of the screen. So now I would like to introduce Christopher Deakin, CEO of the National Arts Centre, who will give us all a little background on the Arts Response Tracking Survey and will introduce our speakers today.
Thank you very much, Aubrey. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe on the nation on the banks of the Kitchissippi River, which we call the Ottawa River. And we're very proud at the National Arts Centre to be collaborating with the local and national Indigenous communities in our work. I want to begin by thanking Aubrey Reeves for her leadership in her new role at the Business and the Arts, and for the continuing engagement in business and the arts and this research. Also want to thank Nik Nanos and Nanos Research, pardon me, for bringing the expertise and insight that I think is so valuable. Also want to thank Christine Armstrong and Irfhan Rawji for their leadership support, their generous philanthropic support of this research. And with that generous support, the National Arts Centre is committed to continuing this collaboration with Business and the Arts and Nanos Research. We believe it holds value for the arts sector across Canada, and enables companies, small and large, including community-based organizations that may not have deep financial pockets to have access to top quality research findings. So more details to follow on that future collaboration, but I just wanted to signal that these updates, this research will continue. Just a few framing remarks today. Really, this information is meant to inform our strategy for our institutions and to reflect the external reality as best we can understand it. We are reporting to you today at this very awkward crossroads where we have, on the one hand, a negative trend line of the pandemic globally and a positive trend line of vaccine distribution. Hopefully, when these two trend lines, as they advance, we're going to hit an inflection point where the daily life becomes easier and safer, and we can all engage with our communities in a much more direct way. Should that point of inflection come later, the cultural sector, I think, risks losing at least partially a very important summer season of festivals and exhibitions this year. And some of the producers who talk to me in the performing arts are continue to feel doubtful even about major commitments for the fall of 21. So I think it's very important that we have a grasp not only on those external realities, but a key factor here, of course, is the attitudes of Canadians. That's really what this research is about, when Canadians will be ready to come back and under what conditions. So I'm really excited to be introducing our three panelists today, and I'll just quickly speak about each one of them. Naomi Johnson is Executive Director of ImagineNATIVE, and she is from the, I cannot pronounce that word, the Mohawk Bear Clan from Six Nations. And Naomi, I look forward to hearing you say that and learning more about it. She's been involved in the arts as a curator, arts administrator, a professional artist, and community arts facilitator. Naomi has a BFA in visual arts from York University and a diploma in cultural resource management from the University of Victoria. She has served as artistic director and co-executive director of the Woodland Cultural Centre, curating and programming exhibitions, festivals, and performing arts events annually. In June 2019, Naomi accepted the position of Associate Director with ImagineNATIVE, and in June 2020, she will and has assumed the role of Executive Director. The second panelist we have today is Tracy Calagas, and Tracy has been the CEO for the Exploration Place Museum and Science Center in Prince George for the last 2 decades. Obviously, Tracy is someone with a lot of experience and insight, presently serving as past president of the Canadian Association of Science Centers and as a Fraser Fort George representative to the Fraser Basin Council. Her past roles have included work as vice chair of the Emily Carr University of Art, as the Art and Design is on the Board of Governors, as well as president for both the British Columbia Museums Association and Northern British Columbia Tourism Association. Ms. Calogheros was honored in 2017 with the Governor General's Award for History and Community Programs for her work on the Lytle Tenon Nation, and in 2006 received the Association of Science and Technology Centers Award for experienced leadership in the field. Wow, that is a lot of relevant experience. I look forward to hearing more from you, Tracy. And our third panelist today is TJ Tasker. And TJ has been an arts professional with over 15 years experience and is currently Director of Marketing and Communications for Canadian Stage in Toronto, where he is primarily responsible for acquisition and loyalty marketing and sales campaigns, institutional PR and brand management, and audience experience. Prior to joining Canadian Stage, he worked with Tessitura Network as a consultant. Many of us know about their products, where he guided many organizations' implementation of Tessitura software. He's also been Director of Marketing and Communications for Soul Pepper Theatre and the Manager of Patron and Operation Services for the Young Centre of the Performing Arts. And he currently sits on the board of Toronto Dance Theatre. So those are your panelists today, and I will pass it on now, I guess, to Nik.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and do a walk through the numbers. As mentioned before, the full report is on the Business for the Arts website in French and English. So for all you data geeks out there, I suggest that you go to the website and download the report in either of the official languages in order to go through all the statistical tables and see all the details. The other thing that I'd like to say is that if you have any technical questions related to the survey itself, please put them in the Q&A box. We don't want to take up time that the panelists will be sharing in terms of their views on what's going on and ideas. And I'd be happy to answer any technical questions that you have in the chat box. So just post it there and I will do my best to cover that off. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. We're going to be covering off three things. First of all, the timing of the return, conditions for return, and then the special topic. And each wave of the Arts Response Tracking Survey, we try to do a special topic. And this particular wave, we wanted to focus on views related to ticket purchases, either single ticket purchases or membership subscriptions. So, key takeaway in terms of the trending over time is, as you might recall, last year in the first two waves, there was a significant focus on social distancing and masks. Now what we're seeing is a full-on shift to, I'm not even sure whether focus is the right word, a fixation on vaccines. You can see the rise in the proportion of culture goers has gone up significantly when it comes to citing vaccines from 15 and 16% in July and May to 44% of outdoor culture goers, and a similar jump. Basically, we've seen this jump right across the board. So we have to think of the vaccine right now as the one hot button issue, triggering event that people are looking for in order to decide when they'll be coming back, and that being one of the key things that Canadians are focused on. So we need to, as a sector, watch what's happening in the news on not just the purchase of vaccines, but the implementation and distribution of vaccines as kind of a key, almost like advanced indicator of future behavior. And obviously, if the vaccine implementation goes well, that'll bode very well for the sector. If there are any kind of issues or delays, then that also suggests that there could be delays in terms of behavior and when people want to come back. Just to kind of recap for different types of cultural activities, first indoor. Now we're starting to capture whether people have reported, culture goers have reported that they've actually gone back to attend an event. And you can see in the tracking now, according to the study, 5% at least of all culture goers have reported coming back to an indoor cultural activity. Another 25% you can see are still ready to immediately come back to an indoor cultural activity. The proportion of unsure is down, but still significantly at 29%, and about 1/3 are still saying they're going to wait. But the key takeaway here is that it doesn't really matter whether you're waiting or unsure. You can see the numbers for vaccines being kind of the key driver that's behind those particular views. On the outdoor cultural event, you can see that people are more likely to report having attended an outdoor cultural event compared to the other options, and still a full third. So, we're up to more than 4 out of every 10 culture goers are ready to immediately or have already kind of returned in terms of participating in a cultural event. But at about 1/4 are still waiting, and another 28% are unsure. For the museums and galleries, you can see when we factor both having attended and immediately, it's at around 37% of all culture goers, with a full 11% of those individual surveys saying that they've already gone to an indoor museum or gallery. But similar numbers when it comes to the vaccines. And when we look at that trend, it's the vaccines that's kind of on the rise as what people cite in terms of what they'd like to see in place before they return. So we just wanted to have a little bit of a summary slide so you can see kind of the scale of return, where you can see museums and art galleries registering a higher level of return compared to indoor events since the pandemic. One of the other things is that we're also starting to track people that are, at least today, are saying that they are not going to return. The interesting thing is that when we crunch these numbers, we thought that there might be some demographic patterns, but this is actually distributed across the country and across age groups and by gender. So there's nothing statistically significant, which says that this might actually be more psychological. And that's probably the good news on this front, that it could be more psychological and dependent on what I'll say the current environment. So as the current environment improves, we might actually see these numbers go down as the normalization, back to Christopher's point, whenever that normalization will take place, once it does take place. So on the special content, the good news is that you can see that more than half of culture goers report some level of comfort. You can see 53% in purchasing a single ticket, and that's even in this particular environment. And about 27% are actually open to purchasing a membership and or subscription. So there's a significant proportion of culture goers that at least are comfortable or open for both of those things. I think it puts on the table the question, how can cultural and arts organizations creatively kind of engage their members and also think about different ways for them to keep that particular relationship going. When we asked an open-ended question on obstacles to participation, you can see that safety and just being exposed to the virus is the main issue. And then the second one has to do with crowds. And only about 10% say there are no obstacles to them attending any in-person cultural or art event. But what I wanted to put on the table are things that are within the control of the arts and culture community and things that are outside of the control. And what's interesting is that when we look at the obstacles, the vast majority, hypothetically, are within the control of arts and cultural organizations, and through either messaging or creating the conditions in order to kind of manage these particular obstacles. You can see that within our control, fear of being exposed to the virus, about 33% of respondents cite that as an obstacle. Another 13% crowds, only 3% cost. So cost isn't really an issue regardless of the strain on the economy right now. But the key takeaway here is that for those arts and culture organizations that are engaging and want to kind of connect and move forward, having messages related to controlling being exposed and also the management of crowds would be significant. And the other key takeaway is that only a minority of those obstacles are outside of the control, or I'd say absolutely outside of the control of arts organizations, because we don't know when a vaccine will appear. We don't know what government regulations might be there. And also, we can't control the fact that about 13% of culture goers report that there's someone in their household that is vulnerable or immunocompromised. So the good news is that even for those obstacles that exist, messaging and communications and creating a positive, safe environment can at least manage a significant proportion of those obstacles, while only a minority are completely outside of the control of arts organizations. So to wrap up, before I pass it over to Christopher again, you can see from the latest tracking that culture goers are comfortable supporting the organizations, the arts and cultural organizations that they love through single ticket purchases, and that more than half are good with that. Also, 1/4 are comfortable with purchasing membership and subscriptions. Vaccines, and it might be a truism, but we have to watch what happens in terms of the next number of months in vaccines, because that'll be a leading indicator. And when we think of the conditions and obstacles, we have to think of people being worried about being exposed, and how arts organizations that have decided to be much more proactive and to have an offering, what they're doing and making sure that they communicate how they're managing that particular experience. So that's basically where we're at right now, Christopher. So some interesting stuff to chew on. I'd be happy to answer any questions in the chat.
So I think we're going straight to Aubrey. Are we?
Yes. So I'd like to ask our panelists to turn on their microphones and their videos so that we can go to questions for them. So welcome to TJ, to Naomi, and to Tracy. Okay. So, well, my first question is for TJ. Prior to COVID, there was many discussions in the sector about decreasing subscription rates and younger audiences preferring single tickets. How does the breakdown in these findings between intention to purchase single tickets versus subscriptions compare to Canadian Stage's pre-COVID trends in ticket sales? And how have you rethought subscriptions?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is really great.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. So I'll deal with the first part of the question there, because I think there is always this ongoing question as to whether subscriptions as a model are subsiding. And our experience at Canadian Stage doesn't quite support that. Subscriptions actually remain a really important part of our business and a significant part of our business. We certainly see fluctuation year to year in our subscription levels, and but overarchingly over the last number of years, things have stayed relatively consistent. Now, our programmatic model shifts somewhat year over year as well in terms of the number of offerings we put out. So that fluctuation is kind of expected for us. Over the years, our subscription model has also shifted and responded to sort of how people are wanting to subscribe and engage in our subscription program or our loyalty program. So we've really moved away from that fixed seat model for where you buy one seat for every Tuesday night, for example. But fundamentally, the subscriptions have remained very much the same. Last year, in January of 2020, of course, we launched our 2021 season and started our subscription renewal campaign. And we were about 5 weeks into our renewal campaign when the pandemic hit. But at that point, we were off to a really strong start, tracking ahead of projections. There was a lot of uptake on our subscriptions. So ultimately, we see a lot of opportunity with subscription, but of course, we understand that the model has to adapt to people's shifting priorities and motivations. We certainly know that some people are interested in subscription for cost savings. Some are interested for the alignment to the artistic offerings and therefore want flexibility to be able to build their own package, that sort of thing. We know that people who buy many shows across a season, a primary driver there is scheduling. They have an affinity to the organization and want to get it into their schedule. So, really, to answer the first part, pre-COVID, as I said, subscriptions were just really important for us and remain so. The second part of the question was, how have we adapted or rethought our subscriptions since COVID? And well, we've had to. I think everybody has had to really, dive in and rethink how they're doing things. We responded at the beginning of the pandemic, as many arts organizations did, which cancel many shows and then really start thinking about what was next. So we took time to dig in and understand what our subscribers and our patrons needed from us. With the help of some third-party support, we conducted a series of focus groups and got some really excellent, valuable input, which helped guide us to roll out sort of a revised subscription or a loyalty program. And our programming model really had to shift as well. So we programmed in smaller tranches, releasing 3 months of work at a time as opposed to an entire season. And so we developed a pass program, which was kind of like a membership program that allows folks who have a pass to access programming as it's released. And this structure has allowed us to be responsive to the changing situation around COVID and to build resiliency within the organization, which is very important for us. Ultimately, we're super pleased with the results. While we anticipated a lot of refunds, we didn't actually see that. We saw a lot of support from our subscribers and pass holders. So a lot of people moved into the pass program. Now, digital offerings aren't for everyone, so a lot of our subscribers supported us in different ways. We created a voucher program, an artist voucher program, where the money was donations that are earmarked to support artists through microgranting and scholarships. We had lots of donations straight to the company, and then account credit. So a lot of people holding money on their account to sort of reinvest when it comes time to launch another subscription series.
Great. So as a follow-up, I wanted to ask Tracy and Naomi, the approach of memberships or festival passes is a little bit different than performing arts subscriptions. So if you could just comment on those differences and how you're really approaching ticketing now.
Sure, I can jump in on that one from the museum side. For my own organization, we have been closed since March 13th. And what we did with our membership was simply extend existing memberships for the period of the closure. I anticipated when we then changed our planning to say, no, we're staying closed until our renovations are done, that I would get a lot of requests for refunds. And in fact, I've only had 3. And so I'm with TJ. I think that folks are really invested in the organizations that they're supporting. So when we get back to an opening stretch, we're going to be looking at timed ticketing most likely. And in talking to my colleagues, it's the time ticketing that most of the other facilities have been using internationally to try and manage some attendance in the midst of this pandemic.
Yeah, and for us at ImagineNATIVE, it was a lot of consultation with other film festivals. This year was definitely not what I envisioned when I became executive director for my first outing with the film festival, but I was very fortunate that I had weekly meetings with other festival EDs, and we were able to kind of help each other out and build a really excellent pass system that I think it worked quite well for us. We had day passes, we had community passes, as well as industry passes, which then we could tool based on the participant of the festival. And for us, it was always really important that everything be very accessible for our communities. So even like the events that we do throughout the festival, we tried to make those as free as much as possible. And then there was a couple that, the ticket price for that one event was, the traditional $6 that we usually ask. So, and I think prior to all of this, what helped inform our decision making and how we did ticketing and pass sales was we asked our communities via a survey in April, what online spaces do you currently attend or do you currently participate in? And so, the big ones were Facebook and YouTube. So given that's like, where our people are actually interacting with every day, we tried our best to make sure that that's where we were giving our event presentation spaces. Aside from our screening spaces, which we had to, there were so many other variables that we had to take into account, like geo-blocking, and each of those involved like individual conversations with the filmmakers and the distributors. So fortunately, film and new media was quite translatable to an online space, and that really helped us. We actually had our biggest box office in the history of the organization doing a virtual festival. But again, that might be because, people are feeling particularly, they want to see us succeed too. And, it's just having those great patrons that we're so thankful for. So I'm afraid I might ramble, so I'll just stop there. And if there's follow-up, I will gladly offer.
Well, you alluded to what I was going to touch on next. You mentioned your box office was a huge success this year. And of course, the festival was entirely online. The federal government has said that their goal is to have the majority of Canadians vaccinated by September of this year. That's just a month before the 2021 edition of ImagineNATIVE Festival. And as we saw in our findings here, 32% of those surveys said they would feel comfortable attending indoor events immediately following vaccination, but there's still a large number, there was 29%, who are unsure, and 8% who don't think they will ever return to indoor events. So with this timeline and all that uncertainty, how are you envisioning the festival for this year? And is a digital festival here to stay?
I will say, I think those 8% that are holding out are just natural introverts anyway. So there's not much retooling we can do for those people. So I'm just going to leave that 8% over there. But I think, yeah, that's cutting it very close to October. Our festival is at the end of October, and digital festival is definitely here to stay. But like, that question is the scope. How much of it is going to be that digital offering versus a physical offering, and what is going to be the safest and the most popular, because that's really what we're dealing with these numbers and how people are, feeling, whether it be, based on vaccinations and, you know, scientific medical like advice that yeah, this is safe, you're still dealing with that psychological, emotional feeling of, you know, being locked in for, you know, the length of time that we have been now. And that's like a real thing. You can't kind of change people's thinking on easily. So for me, I've given myself the deadline of like March to really decide the scope of what we're going to do. Digital's for sure going to say what we offer physically is going to be based on all those variables. What can we do safely, and what are people actually going to be interested in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Tracy and TJ, how are you both balancing plans in 2021 for in-person versus digital presentations?
Boy, I've sure gotten good at reading the tea leaves, and mostly it just tells me to stay home. Yeah, the process for us is trying to schedule a major indoor renovation while we're still looking to have our outdoor events reopen. We operate a steam engine as well as an urban garden and a preschool. So we have some programs that are going to start up again this spring, regardless of where we're at in terms of being able to have people inside. But if I'm working towards a July 1st opening, we're looking at the government promising everyone vaccinated by the end of September. That's only first shots. And I'm not sure that I'm buying timelines that they're going to give us now for next fall. So I think for someone like Naomi, it's a brutal time to try and plan whether you're going to have an event in October or not. My instincts would be to say no and stay digital at this point. And from our perspective at the museum, we are just canceling any kind of traveling exhibit that would have an impact on another organization if we're unable to open, and just continuing to do our work in-house with the skeleton crew that we've managed to retain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll sort of add on to that. I think, you know, we've all been through such volatile shifts in regulations and what we're able to do, and have seen companies, you know, going into rehearsal for shows and then things change and having to cancel. And I think that there's a fatigue around, you know, launching programs and then canceling and shifting, and we kind of want to avoid that. So I think really in line with the results of the survey, we'll really be looking at the vaccination rollout to sort of help guide our timeline for in-theater productions. We are lucky that we produce work each summer in an outdoor venue, the High Park Amphitheater, where we've been doing Shakespeare in High Park for over 30 years. Now, we weren't able to do it last summer because of the newness of the pandemic, but we were in the fall able to pilot some outdoor shows with Dance in High Park, and we had some capacity caps and physical distancing and all of the safety precautions that we needed. So that was a really great opportunity for us to try things out. The response was incredible, and we sold out all the performances until things shifted again. So, you know, building in this cautiously optimistic, this idea of maybe, you know, depending on where we are with being able to produce work outside, and then really looking at the vaccine rollout for in-theater productions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So Tracy, you've alluded to, you're under construction there. You're planning to open in the spring, early summer. So how, and you're a science and technology center, so you've got a lot of hands-on exhibitions. So how is the redesign considering new requirements for safety while creating a welcoming environment for your visitors who might be nervous about being in public spaces? And what do you think all museums and galleries should be doing to reassure that 33% of people who said they're unsure when they're going to feel comfortable in museums?
Yeah, we closed down on March 13th, and we were the first organization in our community to do so. And it did cause a fair bit of pushback, at least for the first 3 or 4 days, until everyone realized that we needed to really shut down. Once we had made that decision, I was doing a lot of work with colleagues across Canada and internationally around how science centers were going to survive this. Well, we have the additional challenge of being a Class A museum as well as being a science center, and we were offering out-of-school care. So the closure was no question in my mind. The reopening becomes the question, and how do you go about that? I have always argued that our arts and cultural facilities, as well as our artists out there in the world, are so central to people's sense of self and to creating a sense of place in our communities. So we needed to think about what our entire industry was going to look like on the other side of COVID. And as the year has shown us, there's no guarantee that COVID's ever going to completely go away. So that meant then that we needed to really start thinking about how do we reach our community? How do we deliver programming and continue to keep our Class A designation so that we can maintain the public trust in perpetuity with our collection? That led us down the path of, okay, what are we doing now? What is the community using the most? Well, we had a children's museum gallery that was hugely popular, saw in excess of 100,000 visits a year, and there was no way to actually sanitize certain portions of it. So it became clear there was no way to retain it. We had to rip it out. That then led to a consideration around what's that going to do to our membership base. Currently, our membership revenue is about 5% of our annual total revenues. And so if we were going to lose a chunk of that from our young families with kids demographic, we needed to find a way to replace that. That led us to an expansion of our Animal Ambassadors program and a doubling of the size of our biome gallery. And we're working towards accreditation as a zoo. So that we felt was going to address the needs of young families with kids and still retain that membership. We also moved our ticketing to the outside envelope of the building. One of the things that's one of the biggest issues for indoor facilities around an aerosolized virus is the 800,000 droplets that you get in a plume every time you flush a toilet. And just about every public toilet has horseshoe-shaped toilet seats, so you can't even close a seat before it's flushed. So we started to work through those challenges as well. What do the bathrooms have to look like? Can we operate an out-of-school care program? Ultimately, we decided to move our ticketing to the outside of the building so that we don't have general public coming in to use washrooms. It's only our guests that'll be part of the timed ticketing. You know, it's one thing leads to the next. I've heard this year described as building the plane while you're flying it. And that is exactly what we are doing here at Exploration Place, because there was simply no other opportunity to, normally you'd have a great big plan and a fundraising lead up and a public launch. Well, we shut down, started to build a plan and started to fundraise before we even had the plan finalized. And so I just think it's the nature of the beast at the moment. And in order for us to know that we're going to be safe to reopen, we had to address HVAC and ventilation and traffic flow throughout the building and high touch exhibits and replace those with other things that were going to be every bit as engaging. We have a responsibility, in my view, as arts and culture industries and organizations to present the public with trustworthy and accurate information. And so we couldn't very well partially open or have kind of an event. We needed to really rethink everything from the ground up. And that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So Naomi and TJ, without the advantage of a major renovation going on, for public performance and presentation spaces, how are you going to make your venues welcoming?
I think just thinking about like our physical spaces that we've traditionally had, our events in, you know, those conversations I have planned in the coming weeks, because those are things that I need to ascertain from each individual venue. My whole thing from the very beginning of this has been 100% just keeping everybody safe. And that's what has dictated all my decision making. And that is not going to change for this year. So that is just like one of those conversations that I need to have to kind of really firm up my mind for the direction that we're going to take.
Yeah, and I'll sort of echo all of what's already been said around measures to take. You know, I think for us leaning into the opportunity or potential opportunity for outdoor performance, which has you know, we've piloted and had some great success with. But you know, we've already explored things like timed entry, which is not a typical process for in a theater setting. But sort of staggering people's arrival time to get them into the theater, really considering traffic flow within the buildings. You know, we're looking at contactless ticket scanning, for example, for attendance tracking and that sort of thing. So ways that we can really, you know, reduce any risk. But as I said in the you know, previous question, it's, you know, for indoor, you know, we really have to rely on or take our cues from the vaccination rollout.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have one more question for our moderated discussion, and it's really for all of you. The top barriers to returning to the arts mentioned in the findings were first, the fear of being exposed to the virus, not surprisingly, and second, fear of crowds or other people not respecting health measures. So I want to zoom in on this idea of fear. It's a powerful emotional response. It's hard to counteract with rational arguments. So what can we all do from a marketing and communications perspective to assuage the fears of arts patrons so they feel more comfortable to return to indoor events and art spaces?
I think like your visibility is a huge thing, to have signage, like these are the expectations, you know, the distancing, the hand sanitizers, the mask wearing, and then just being kind of completely communicative with what other additional measures you've taken. Like, is there, you know, an upgraded HVAC system in this theater space that, you know, that's, I mean, these are all things that like I'm really having to make sure that I have in place. If this is a physical route, this is all hypothetical for me right now. So maybe someone else might have a better answer for this.
Yeah, I feel like the politicization of absolutely everything at the moment is causing a lot of this fear and is really having an impact on people's decision-making and willingness to engage with whatever source of information they're given. The Ontario Science Centre did a national survey a few years back looking at public trust in particular, and science centers, museums, zoos, galleries, botanical gardens were singled out by Canadians as the single most trusted source of reliable information. We beat out universities, we certainly beat out politicians, we definitely beat out media and industry. So I think that with the question of fear and the return to public events, we really do have a responsibility. Canadians have already told us that they trust all of us. So we have a job to do in terms of helping society to normalize post-COVID. Whether COVID completely disappears or not, there is going to be life post-2020. So we need to find a way to have our role in that. And I think when you're talking about addressing people's fears, we're the right places to be doing it. Folks already trust us. So as long as we are certain that we're not jumping the gun, trying to get open because we're chasing $1 at the gate, opening up with a quasi-lousy experience just to say that we're open for a funder. I think it's really important that we do what Naomi said and put that concern for everyone's safety front and center and talk about it. Challenge people when they challenge us on it, and make sure that one of the things I will be doing is hiring security for when we do reopen. We've never had security in this building, but I will have, because it is not appropriate for me to ask a junior part-time staff person to deal with a middle-aged woman who's losing her mind because she's being expected to wear a mask, or the reverse of that, some father who's upset because somebody else's kid isn't maintaining physical distancing. Like, it just is a nightmare to think about on my gallery floor. So we're going to put security in front and center to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think communication is really going to be key. You know, people's experience coming back into a theater after what could be, you know, 2 years of absence is really going to shift people's perceptions and expectations, and so being able to set up those expectations of what the experience will be. With Dance in High Park last fall, we actually took the opportunity to document the entire process. So you know, we have lots of great video footage, for example, of what it's like to arrive in a space where you're having to maintain physical distance, and how we, you know, got people into the space safely, and so having those kinds of materials at our disposal so that we can communicate that out in advance of people arriving, so there's no surprises. And I also think that being really clear about the flexibility that we'll be able to offer. You know, if people aren't feeling comfortable, then or they're not feeling well, then, you know, giving them opportunity to exchange tickets or move their, you know, dates around and things like that, I think is going to be also pretty important.
Thank you, everyone. This was really an interesting discussion so far. I'm now going to ask Monica to join us. She's going to do a little roundup, and then we'll have questions from our audience. And we are going to 4:30, so we have lots of time for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Aubrey. So before we get into the roundup and the questions, once again, I'd like to remind everyone that Business and Arts National Matching Incentive and Mentorship Training Program, ArtsFest, is launching in February in the provinces of Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the cities of Montreal and Toronto. And if you would like more information on that and to see if your organization will be eligible to participate, please visit our website, businessandarts.org and /artsfest. And now getting into the roundup. So as of now, here's what audiences are doing. Culture goers are comfortable supporting their favorite organization in 2021, with 11% already returning to museums since the pandemic started. 9% of these have already returned to outdoor events, while 5% have returned to indoor ones. Some uncertainty that we all are facing for 2021 is that one of the biggest uncertainty or obstacles organizations are facing is the availability of the vaccine. Segueing into once vaccinated, 44% said that they would return to an outdoor event within 5 months of opening, and this is more than doubled since last year. 46% have said that they would attend an indoor event during the same time period. This is almost double last year's numbers as well. But there is some optimism. Over half of culture goers say that they are comfortable or somewhat comfortable purchasing live tickets to their favorite organization, and 1 in 4 expresses interest in purchasing subscriptions. So now segueing into our questions, we did receive one more pre-submitted question that addressed small to mid-size arts organizations, and we know a lot of you watching do fit into that demographic, so we wanted to include this one as well. So summer festivals, especially the smaller ones, are highly dependent on ticket sales. After the disastrous summer we had in 2020, many of us will be risk averse to go forward with in-person programming without clear signs that our audiences will come back. Yet, on the other hand, if we plan only digital programming and by the summer vaccines have been widely distributed, there will be a strong appetite for in-person experiences. We could miss the boat in either scenario. As a small festival, we don't have the capacity nor the budget to put in place multiple contingency plans. Do any of you have any suggestions on the least risky course of action?
One of the things I know what we're going to do is we are again, I know everyone loves surveys, but we're going to do it again. I want to like pointedly ask those who do attend, how are you feeling? I think just trying to have some feedback directly from them is probably the wisest course of action. So that would be the thing that I would recommend.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would also say that you've got to weigh your options carefully, but also set a moment in time where you've got a go or no go date, because if you're not clear about that and what the actual risks are for your organization, I think that's where you might find yourself in a little bit of trouble. So, committing to that date and say, if we feel confident at this date, then we can go ahead with some in-person programming, but otherwise, go digital.
Yeah, for us, I have promised my community that if they can't be in the building with us this summer, that we will be in the park with them. So in terms of development of programming, we're going forward. Honestly, we're building our programming as if our building will be closed, because worst comes to worst, I can utilize the building. But I'm going to have a low return to in-person attendance inside my building, regardless of my renovations, in my opinion. So I think it's going to be very important to plan to be in the park in socially distanced ways outside.
Thank you. Our first question in the question and answer box, reminder to upvote any that you would like to hear. You still have time. Okay, so our first question from Rekha Sharma. To the panelists, in your experience with the pivot to or expansion on digital programming, what would make you feel more engaged in a digital platform? I am finding personally a bit of exhaustion with the amount of content to consume online, but as an arts worker, feel that there is an immediate need and benefit to providing digital experiences for our audiences.
One of the things that we did this year, this is something we really identified early on, is like the fatigue, right? How do we make this special? How do we make this stand out from anything else? So we did a lot of our programming around the concept of giveaway, and giveaway is just in some Indigenous cultures, the acknowledging that you have a lot, or you have something and you want to distribute with your community. So using that as a theme, we made sure that almost every single event had a giveaway portion, and we had great sponsors this year, and we gave away like over $25,000 in prizes. Sobeys was one of them that really came through to us, so that was important because that's food. And so that was a huge success. So trying to find that, in like Indigenous communities, we love anything we can win. I know me, I love winning things, so it worked. It really did.
I know for us, we pivoted immediately to doing online visits, and really it started just because we have our live animals, and I was the only one coming into the building right in that first week or so. So I started doing Facebook Lives on my own personal Facebook page, and it exploded. So that very quickly turned into, I better find someone who actually knows about these animals and bring my head keeper in for this. So we were doing Facebook Lives every day at the same time for many weeks at the very beginning of our closure. We switched from the live animals to adding in my curator, and we were doing What Does Chad Have with objects out of our physical collection. And we were doing live question and answer, similar to what we're doing today. It worked really well, but then as the weather got better, our attendance plummeted. And so we thought, well, okay, people are going outside, they're doing other things. So we stopped doing our Facebook Lives. We tried porting all of the existing ones over to the YouTube channel, and the attendance has been not a patch on it. We had more attendance at our Facebook Lives in the first 3 weeks than we do in a full year of in-person attendance. I know the Toronto Zoo had a very similar experience. They were up to over 1 million interactions inside of the first month online. So I think animals are an easy sell every time out. And my other piece of advice is it has to be live. Anything recorded that we have put up and left up, virtually no interest. But if we put out something live, it has huge attendance and lots of interaction. So that would be my advice on the digital front. And I can tell you that that's been pretty similar to the experiences of all of my Science Center and museum colleagues that we have been talking about in terms of that digital pivot.
It's interesting because our experience in terms of creating events that are digital we learned a lot in the beginning, because we tried to not recreate a theater experience, but we created that the element of live by making it only available live. And what we learned very quickly is that with talks and panels and things like that, is that we might have hundreds of people sign up, and then about half show up for the live event, and then the other half ask, where can I watch the recording? And so we learned very quickly that to make things available also after the live event as well, to sort of maintain the level of engagement that we were looking for. So
that was our experience as well. Is like we really did a mix of live versus pre-recorded. With the pre-recorded stuff, it was really important to represent the artists well and make sure it looked polished, and we were able to do that if we pre-recorded it and had our slides ready to go. So we would have that pre-recorded segment and then follow it up directly with live Q&A after watching, which really, really worked well for us. And yeah.
Just a friendly reminder before the next question, if you ever miss a Business and Arts webinar, you can find them all archived on our website. Okay, our next question comes from Lori Kinsman, and this one is actually towards Nik Nanos and the research that we saw in the first half. So Lori asks, mentioned that 5/9/11% of audiences have returned. Small numbers, but is this also perhaps a function of lack of product? Example, there's nothing to attend because of lockdown restrictions.
Thanks, and Lori, I'd like to apologize because I accidentally tried to answer to your question first, because you were the first question on the research, but I pressed the wrong button, so I've technologically failed. No, so my sense is that this is not due to lack of product, because that never really came up in any of the research. I think a lot of this has to do with the psychological mindset of people, and you have to realize, so think of it this way. So why don't we just say that 5 to 11% of Canadians have been completely traumatized by the pandemic? Why don't we just say that? And I don't think that's actually a very big number. And as a result, they can't see themselves normalizing anything, like going back to any kind of activity. Maybe they don't even see themselves going back to church right? Because of what's happening. So my sense right now is that that's more psychological compared to what's available in the marketplace.
Thank you. Our next question comes in from Sarah Diamond, and Sarah asks, is there any indication that engagement with virtual events provided by organizations have an impact on retaining loyalty and willingness to return to events? From Naomi's intervention, there seems to be a relationship, and it seems rational.
Yeah, I don't know if we're far enough through this to really have the kind of data that we need to know if there's a direct link yet. I mean, that's certainly the hope. When I'm talking to my colleagues, the conversations are all about staying top of mind, providing assets into the educational community and supporting our members through these shutdowns and retaining that connection and that relationship in practice. It's worked not badly, but I just did a thing here at this museum where we're building a living wall as part of our renovations. And I asked the community to bring us plant cuttings from their own collections. And the people that brought me plant cuttings are completely different than the people that were participating in our Facebook Live events. So, I mean, that's just an anecdotal piece of information, but I think that when we look back on this 5 years from now, then that question could get answered with some kind of realism. But in the short term, that's my hope.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to like formulate or process the question a little bit, but you know, I think what we've seen definitely is that the folks who bought into our past program are engaging with the digital programming, as well as some of the other subscribers who didn't necessarily purchase a pass. So I think ensuring continuity across this time of upheaval is important. We are also communicating in different ways through, through social media, through e-newsletters and the like. And so shifting a little bit to maintain, continuity, I think is important. I'm not sure if that totally answers the question, but.
Yeah, that was like one of the biggest contributing factors to deciding to go digital in 2020 was we were in a space where we could present. It would take a lot of research, it would take a lot of pre-production work, but we could do it. And knowing that we would be paying artists screening fees and a time in a year when that was very much needed, it was a huge motivating factor, as well as securing those sponsors that would support us upping our awards for festival winners. So our prizes, we managed to double this year just because we could allocate funds differently than we would if we were in a physical space. So, yeah.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Lynette Hines, and Lynette asks, for groups that are looking to put on live productions eventually, have you given any thought to declaring that participants, example, actors, musicians, etc., must present a completed vaccine series before they are able to participate?
This is a question I'm so curious about because I know that statistic came out really last week or this week even. Was it 7 or 8 out of 10 Canadians are feeling like it's okay to demand that you have this proof before you can attend. I don't know how I feel about that personally just yet. I can't imagine what that would be like to police. That's, I think, where my mind goes with that.
Yeah, to answer the question directly, we've not discussed it in great detail just yet because we're so early in the rollout of the vaccine. And so I think it will be up for discussion.
It's a difficult question to answer concerning unions as well.
Yeah, we're debating it as part of the development of our new HR policy because we went from 40 staff down to 10. And so we're going to restaff. Now's the opportunity to really look at our policies around vaccination. I suspect that I would have more success requiring it or a medical exemption of my paid staff than I would from my visitors. I'm just talking off the cuff here, but I suspect that by the time we reopen, we are accepting the notion that the vaccinations are widespread enough that masks and physical distancing would protect us regardless of whether or not you had someone that was an anti-vaxxer or just didn't vax for whatever reason. So I think from our perspective, we're still exploring it too, but I don't see us applying that to the attendees as visitors, perhaps as registrants in childcare or out of school programming, and perhaps for staff. That's where we're at.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Daryl Lindenbach, and Daryl asks, a major issue with offering live theater online is that often less than the desired outcome of the product. Does anyone know of any ideas, discussions, or funding that may be planned or available to help encourage the film/video industry to work with the live theater industry to help bring and translate the live vision to a medium they are not used to working in?
Yes, I mean, I would agree that there's often a loss of spectacle when you're trying to move something from live into a digital platform. In terms of funding and planning, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that particular piece just now. But we've seen a lot of organizations who have filmed their stage works do quite well, who film them over the course of years, distribute them. And I think the key is that the quality is super important. An archival video presented online doesn't really cut it, but multi-camera filming, high quality shoots are desirable.
I know that Canadian Heritage has pushed some money out too, mainly through the RDAs, specific to the digital pivot. I've looked at it from the museum side. I'm not sure about live performance.
We utilized those funds just because, again, it all goes back to how we're presenting artists, and that was such a big motivating factor in what we did, in fact, pre-record and polish up, because we do want it to have that consistent look. We want people to attend the event, know, okay, here's ImagineNATIVE, giddy up, there's the bumper reel, and it worked. And I think our welcoming gathering would be the one that I would check out. You could find that on our YouTube channel. That one, I think, really translated from what we physically would do with our welcoming gathering, having presentations and speakers and an opening by our elder, Pauline. And then it was interspersed with performances. We hired Indigenous production company, 50/50 Productions, that recorded or had pre-recorded elements that we edited together. And then we did a cooking segment because food was such a big important part of that event. So they did a wild rice and berries cooking that you could ideally follow along with later if you wanted to. But that's just one of the events that I could think. Yeah.
I do remember that our Business and Arts webinar last week, presented by Global Public Affairs, Sean and Tara mentioned a bunch of those digital funds. So if you haven't checked out that webinar yet, be sure to check out that one. Our next question comes from Vicky, and Vicky asks, when hosting in-house events, do you ask patrons to sign waivers releasing your organization from liability should someone contract COVID and suspect exposure at your event?
When we did our dance in High Park last fall, we certainly didn't ask people to sign waivers, but they're in the sort of terms and conditions of the ticket purchase, there was some language around that piece. I don't have the language off the top of my head, but it was in there.
No, I sourced a legal opinion on waivers many years ago when we were throwing a piano off the roof of the museum. And the legal opinion I got was that waivers aren't really worth the paper they're written on. So I don't know that we would bother with it.
I can move on to the next question. Our next question is from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, in some ways, 2021 will likely be more tricky than 2020. We're wondering how the business community will support and be there for arts organizations during this year of flexibility and different numbers and timelines that need to always change. They were very supportive in 2020, but it seems like that this year they are looking for numbers/plans again.
Yeah, I think that's why it's really important to kind of make up your mind quickly on this and just decide this is the way it is. This is the best decision to make for the organization and for the works we're presenting. And then you have that confident, solid direction that you can then pitch to those sponsors. And I 100% agree with you. 2021 is way trickier than for me than 2020. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think for us, 2020, we came through. Even 2021, I think we'll be all right. It's once we reopen, we start to bleed money. And when I look at any level of funding, whether we're talking about government, foundation, or individual philanthropy, I think that we're going to be challenged in the future. Museums in particular tend to be a nice to do, not a need to do. And so I think that an awful lot of individual funding decisions are going to be made around the healthcare system and some of the other existential threats that are facing humanity right now. So a huge piece of my planning and my thinking has been to stay closed, get as much money set aside as I can to do the renovations that I need to do, and then do my best to have earned revenue streams that are going to bring in at least 50%, if not more, of our annual operation going forward. We're blessed to have a really good relationship with the Regional District of Fraser Fort George, and we have funding agreements with them that roll in 5-year rolling envelopes. So they are usually good for about 40% of my core operation, but the balance of that we have to earn. And so that's why we have really gone hard on new earned revenue streams, like a food service.
Okay, I can move on to our next question. Our next question is from Katie, asking, how do you manage the ask for memberships, subscriptions, or single tickets versus donations or refund to donation? I know we are trying to manage the expectation of giving for our donors and patrons.
It's a really great question. I would say that managing the ask for anything, whether it's a membership, subscription, or a ticket versus donations, is to be able to demonstrate the impact of what it is that they're offering or that you're asking for. So, being able to communicate what the money is being used for, how you're sustaining the organization. For us, it was creating various streams of programming to support artists through COVID, through granting programs and scholarships and things like that. So having being able to demonstrate that, I think, was key for us.
For us, a big win for this past festival was before the ticketing system with the venue that we usually are hosted in, we weren't able to capture donations per purchase, like, that option, would you like to donate? And this year we were able to do that because of using an online ticketing system. And, that generated for us like almost 9,500 in revenue that we've never been able to capture before.
Okay, moving on to our next question. For all venues, are you factoring in whether you will have to hire extra security or police to ensure that audiences do what they are supposed to regarding masks, physical distancing, etc.? I know you touched on this earlier, Tracy, but I don't know if you all want to revisit the question.
I am now.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly looking at staffing complements for all of our venues for when we go back into live performance. Absolutely.
Yeah, truly, it's the staffing and the increased needs for staffing that we've never had before. I can't hire a custodial service. I'm going to have to hire custodians. I need security staff on hand. Yeah, that's where I say I'm better to stay closed, work out my whole system, and reopen when I can count on those earned revenue streams to largely carry us.
Yeah, I know it was flippant and I joked a little bit, but yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we've always done with our festival is not only, we've always looked at like mental health and wellness, especially given our patrons and some of the content that's shown at the festival. So every year we hire a third party mental health services organization of elders that are available, to talk should people need them. So to me, this is just good sense. Again, health, safety, and wellness always, what determines my thinking. So yeah, for sure.
Our next question is about solutions to large live ensemble performances, and it's from Paul. He says, I need some help regarding live performance. We are a large choral group, which means lots of people on stage and lots of people in the audience. Do you have any ideas on suggestions?
On how to, suggestions on how to execute a performance?
I'd say that's what they're looking for. They're looking for advice on how do you manage having all of those people and bodies in a space in an aerosolized virus pandemic, I would say is what that question is.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we all are, I think it's really responding to recommendations from the health authorities and taking those, what's being set out in terms of gathering restrictions, physical distancing, sanitization, all of those things. I mean, yeah, I think every venue is, we're all looking at that. And I mean, right now we're not even allowed to, so.
Yeah, ventilation is a huge piece of the science behind all of this, but with the new variants that are coming out and the increased ability to transmit, who knows, like the bets are off. The science is not yet in.
If you're looking for ideas on keeping your members engaged, I would say search virtual gatherings or anything of the sort. Recently, I joined a virtual video game orchestra. Our next question comes from Jessie Cahoon, saying, to the organizations who have adapted to the virtual world, do you foresee maintaining the additional offerings?
100% yes. It was such a success, and that's kind of the first thing that post-mortem board meeting we had is like, so we're pretty much in agreement. This is going to be a thing we always do. Yes. I'm like, yeah, okay. Gotta figure out how I'm gonna do that now. how am I gonna organize this budget going forward forever? But anyway, yes.
I think in a country like Canada, having these digital offerings simply makes sense. We're all so physically far apart that I think the holdback to this point has been the complete lack of high-speed internet access in most of rural Canada. So with the government's focus on that last mile program and the increase of high-speed fiber all over Canada, I think that the public has shown us they will participate in digital offerings when they're there, and they'll also come in person if that ability is there as well.
Yeah. I think we've seen some really interesting, to sort of expand on that, access to audiences and participants across the country. Now, depending on the type of program it is, some will definitely be more suited to digital offerings, but I think it's always going to be part of the consideration. And now that we've all learned very quickly on how to produce these digital events, I think it's a real excellent tool for us to have.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is from Ron Walker. This is asking, canceling is okay, I think, but an organization must also do some other outreach to keep their brand alive. Canceling without future engagements will hurt your organization in the short term and long run. So what are your thoughts on this, on canceling without any sort of backup, I suppose?
Agreed. I think, yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think that a lot of organizations, we've shifted to, once you cancel a show, there's obviously some sort of necessary tactical things that need to happen. What are we doing with those tickets? What are we doing with that money, et cetera, et cetera. But then maintaining that lines of communication on an ongoing basis. Yeah, it's really important. And we created a video series where every couple of months we're sort of just keeping people up to date on what initiatives we're doing.
We talked about it quite a bit in the Science Center world around reclosures, because there aren't very many centers that stayed closed like we did. So a lot of my colleagues were reopening and then finding they had to reclose. And the impact that second closure had on staff as well as on visitation, I think is something to consider. Oh, and super off topic, hair care product on my curls, Diva Curl.
Not sponsored, but Diva Curl, you can get in on sponsorship for future webinars.
There you go.
Our next question comes from Peter Lehman saying, what do you think will trigger the tipping point toward general confidence returning to live events? A certain percentage of vaccination, say 70%, or signs that major festivals are being run without favorable outcomes? The Prime Minister and family attending events?
I think that it's not like there's not a delineation point to this answer this question. I said this to one of my colleagues that, you know, things will return. They will. It will. The reason I know this is because we've had a global pandemic 100 years ago, and, you know, that took some time, but the world did open up again. When that is, I can't predict, but it will.
I think all you've got to do is look at the experience after SARS in, what was that, 2012? It took about 2 years for visitation to return to pre-SARS levels at Toronto institutions. Obviously, this is a far bigger impact globally than SARS was, and I think that it will have impacts on people longer term, but people will come back.
Yeah, and I think we'll also be taking guidance from, you know, research studies like the one we're discussing today. You know, there's been a clear shift in these the release of the data around vaccination, and as people feel more confident in that process, I think we'll be able to make decisions.
It's probably got more to do with numbers of people in ICU than it does number of people's vaccinated when you're talking about people making decisions that are coming out of a fear position.
Absolutely. Our next question is concerning trust. Thank you, Trudy. Trudy asks, speaking of trust, have any of you at your organizations held informational events about how COVID is spread? Trudy thinks this might help just inform participants who might not get that information elsewhere.
I think, like, if you were to, you know, host a live event, I think that should just be part of your housekeeping before you begin. You know, like, make sure your phones are turned off, make sure you're keeping physical distancing, please wear your mask, whatever the rules are you decide, or what's recommended by, you know, what the health professionals are recommending. I think that is going to be a reality. It's just going to become a part of the housekeeping that you do before you kick off.
Smithsonian put out an exhibit that they had developed prior to the onslaught of COVID, but it was around outbreaks. And so we brought the panels in for that, had them printed, and then we've circulated them. We've had them in our windows. We've offered them up to schools and to other community organizations. The idea just being to send some information out there about zoonotic disease and how it spreads and why all of these existential threats to humanity are inextricably interconnected worldwide. Yeah, I absolutely think that we have a responsibility to tell those stories in ways that make sense, because you're right, we have gotten through these before, Naomi, the 1918 Spanish flu, and all you have to do is look at measles and smallpox. I mean, we're used to this. We have done this before. We will get through this together. But right now, I think with the prevalence of interconnected social media, everyone's hearing about this every minute of every day. And so those levels of anxiety are that much higher.
There was one last interesting question that I noted concerning the biggest obstacles all of you faced in virtualizing performances, and it was asked by someone at the art gallery in Orillia, Ontario. So if you have any perspectives on that.
I don't think I understood the question.
They were asking what were the biggest obstacles all of you faced in virtualizing your events, and they were asking in the perspective of someone who's working at an art gallery.
Oh, when you I don't know. You have an answer to that one. They've stumped the panel.
It's like a you know, it was just trying to beat the clock. It's like, I feel like we had to do so much learning as we went. It's like, that was the biggest obstacle, is not knowing how are we going to do this? You know, what's the right platform? What do we make free? How do we make it available? For what length of time is appropriate? Like, So just that unknown. So like, yeah, that was the biggest obstacle, just the sheer amount of learning we had to do. Thankfully, I had a very willing and creative team that like just was able to like take that on, and I give a lot of credit to my team that they were, you know, they made it a success. So yeah, the learning.
I would agree. I think that the technical challenges up front were where we had to put most of our focus, but then there was also the distribution and then the uptake in terms of how people are going to respond, and ensuring that we build in flexibility so that we can adjust and not get, you know, set in a way that's not going to work. So.
Absolutely. So I think with that, that's about all the questions we have time for. So I'd like to pass it back off to Robert to close us out. But just before that, I do want to thank you all again for taking the time to join our panel and to answer so many questions that so many people were curious about.
That's like the only difference pretty much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here we go. Greetings, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for joining us and for participating one more time. I'd like to start by acknowledging Christopher Deakin and the National Arts Center. It was Christopher who called Business and Arts to suggest they would provide leadership funding to get this all going. And so without Christopher's thoughtful leadership, we wouldn't be here today. So a big thank you to you, Christopher, and your team. Also, of course, Nik, thank you once again. This is number 3. You do a great job for us. We appreciate it enormously. It is helpful to have data, to have an overview, of which you do so well for all of us. I'd also like to acknowledge the Canadian Opera Company, Woodbridge Company, which is the Thompson family, and Christine Armstrong and Irfhan Rawji as patrons of the National Arts Center Foundation for their specific support for this initiative. I might say that Christine Armstrong was at one time part of our team at Business and Arts, and I think I'm correct in saying that we bring many things together, including them. They now live in Calgary and have a young family, and they're wonderful, wonderful people, and Irfan's a dear friend of mine. So with all of that, I'd like to then finally conclude by saying we live in obviously a period of frightening uncertainty, but we had 3 very impressive, thoughtful art leaders helping us think through these issues. And we had representation from a museum, theater, and film in the form of Tracy, Naomi, and TJ. You 3 were most impressive. You did a great job. Clearly, you have thought through these issues and you're working diligently to get your organizations out the other side successfully. So with all of that, let me finally just say, please visit the Business Arts website and follow through as we continue on in these dialogues with all of you. All the best. Bye now.